Before we even get started, check the timeline below. Timestamps are in the description, so if you came here looking for something specific, feel free to skip around since we're covering a lot. This is a new and improved version of my old farming guide, where we'll be going over the best ways to farm nearly every resource in the game, along with any other relevant information you may need. This information is current with the upcoming Age of War Chapter 4, which releases in April. The only major difference is that a lot of resources that are meant to be collected by hand will no longer be harvestable by tools. This includes things like sticks, wooden planks, branches, tiny brimstone rocks, grubs. For some fucking reason. Please say psych. Please say psych. Along with all crystals, and yes, even the big ones. Don't worry, I'll remind you which resources this applies to as we go along, and as always, if anything changes or if I wind up forgetting something, check the pinned comment for updates. There are only 3 mandatory perks for any farming build. Put 20 points in expertise, grabbing Efficient Harvest and Beast of Burden. Beast of Burden is self-explanatory since you need it to carry any real amount to farm, but make sure that you always take Efficient Harvest and never Careful Harvest. The low-level sorcery spell, Detect Resources, which is free to cast and lasts until you turn it off, has a hidden effect. It gives you the Careful Harvesting perk while it's active. This effect doesn't stack with the actual Careful Harvesting perk, but it will work alongside the Efficient Harvest perk, so with the spell active you get to have both. Additionally, there are resources in this game that are limited to 1 per kill, things like Religious Favor or Zath Bags. With the Efficient Harvest perk, if you harvest these resources on the final swing, you actually get twice the amount per kill. So for a lot of the rare resources that actually matter, Efficient Harvest is still better. So again, never take Careful Harvest. The only other mandatory perk would be Quick Footed. It's 15 points into the agility tree. Again, it's self-explanatory. It makes you move faster for less stamina. Really, this one's mandatory for almost any build, but especially for farming. From there, you can choose whatever you want. Going further into the Rolling Thrust is a popular choice, but in Chapter 4, Rolling Thrust will no longer make your next attack cost no stamina, so it's by no means a must-have once that drops. Personally, I max my agility, vitality, and expertise so I can still fight while I'm farming, and legendary katanas are easy to get. Watch my video on the Siege of Almariah to learn more about that. Star Metal is your budget option. It's only 1 step below the best tools in the game, and it's super easy to obtain in large quantities. Star Metal with a tool efficiency kit is your bare minimum for endgame farming. Star Metal will fall periodically in 2 locations: the frozen northwest in the Exiled Lands, and around the center of the map in Siptah. You'll be able to see them falling from far away, and if you're on an online server, there's a good chance there's already Star Metal lying on the ground in these areas. If you're playing in single player on Exiled Lands though, it can be tough to get Star Metal to fall in the first place. This is because it will only trigger if somebody is nearby, and it can take some time to do so. I'd suggest leaving your character in the north somewhere overnight, or if you don't mind using admin commands, use the command DC Meteor Spawn to trigger a Star Metal fall immediately. In Chapter 4, the Purge will also have a chance to spawn a Star Caller, a sorcerer that will attack your base with meteors. These meteors are actually Star Metal, so if you don't mind a bit of collateral damage, high-level surges can bring Star Metal straight to your door. The Star Metal nodes themselves have to be cracked open using some kind of explosive. Explosive arrows are my usual choice since they're the most cost-effective, but Demon Fire Orbs are easy to get from loot chests, and regular bombs will work as well in a pinch. Remember, there's 4 bombs you can grab from the Siege of Almariah for free at level 1 if you need it. If you've got your sorceries unlocked, the Mass Cull spell will break the shells and harvest the Star Metal as well. The next level of harvesting power includes Obsidian, Eldarium, and Black Blood Tools. All 3 of these will harvest the exact same amount per swing. What separates them is the fine print. Obsidian Tools are unlocked here, in the Well of Skelos behind the final boss. You don't have to kill the final boss to get the recipe, just walk up and interact with the stone. Once you have it unlocked, you can make the tools at home, but you have to craft the composite obsidian you need in the Well of Skelos. You'll have to go to the forge by the entrance. Each composite obsidian bar costs 1 steel bar and 10 obsidian. You can also find the composite obsidian in drops and loot chests, so it isn't a bad idea to check the chests in the dungeon while you're waiting. It can be a hassle to get composite obsidian, but it's well worth the time investment. However, the recipe for obsidian tools is not obtainable on Siptah. Instead, use Eldarium. The recipe is unlocked at the Ley Shrine of the Birdmen here. You craft them with Eldarium bars, which you get from taking the unrefined Eldarium that you get from vaults and certain enemy drops and smelting them in a furnace. Eldarium is the only one of the big 3 that has a pickaxe option, which is super useful for mass-producing bark and resin, making it one of the better choices if you have access to it. Black Blood tools drop from these 2 bird bosses. They have a chance to drop any Black Blood tool and sometimes multiple at a time. They also have a chance to spawn in certain loot chests. The thing is, these now count as legendaries, meaning they can't be repaired. That said, these birds are a decent source of demon blood and black blood, so if you're coming here anyways, there's no reason to not try for a tool. Once you have your tools, you need to upgrade them with either a tool upgrade kit or an oil of bounty. These two don't stack, so you have to choose one or the other. Tool upgrade kits are crafted at the Tinker's Bench and cost either iron, steel, or hardened steel depending on which tier you're crafting. When applied to a tool, it reduces the maximum durability of the tool in exchange for a permanent buff to how much it harvests. Weapon oils are unlocked from the Archivist on the Exiled Lands, and is either a Schematics reward or a vault chest on Siptah. I'll explain how recipes work on Siptah in more detail later, so don't worry if you don't know what that means yet. This recipe unlocks a variety of oils that can be crafted in an alchemy table, but the important one for this video is the oil of bounty. Once you apply the oil, the durability bar is replaced with a timer that scales with the tool's durability. While that timer is active, the amount of resources that your tool harvests is greatly increased, much more than a tool upgrade kit. However, once the timer runs out, the oil will be removed and the tool will be nearly broken. The more base durability the tool has, the longer the oil will last. Crafting your tools with a good blacksmith will increase that durability, with a tempersmith being the best. The important thing to note though is that the timer only decreases while the tool is actively equipped, not while the tool is in your inventory or the hotbar. So to make the most of the timer, the moment you're finished using a tool, dodge roll. This will cancel the animation, which allows you to unequip it much faster than normal. It doesn't seem like much, but those seconds add up. Although I'll warn you, this works better for some tools than others. Additionally, try to kill enemies on top of each other in dense areas and carry your swings when farming other materials. This is not only faster, allowing you to farm multiple nodes at once, but also minimizes the amount of time that you have to keep your tool equipped. If you're on the Isle of Siptah, you can obtain the Sigil of the Gremlin from the Refuge of the Gremlins. Consume the sigil to apply it. This has a chance to be lost on death, but it will remain active until that happens. If you're not sure if you still have a sigil active, you can check your stat page to see. This sigil increases the maximum harvest amount of any resource by 2, which doesn't seem like much except that it also applies to resources that are supposed to be limited to 1 per kill. Think things like Zath bags or religious items and Maelstrom Chaos. If you happen to harvest something with the efficient harvest perk and the Sigil of the Gremlin, well, now you're getting up to 6 times the favor and 6 times the Zath bags, and so on and so forth. Goes without saying, but if you're on Siptah, this one's mandatory. Obtaining recipes on Siptah can be extremely confusing, but you'll need to know where to go to unlock things if you're going to enjoy your time there. I'll be referencing these recipe sources later, so here's a quick rundown. Siptah has 4 general sources for recipes: the Tower of Siptah, Vault Chests, Schematic Fragments, and Surges. For simplicity's sake, we're not going to cover all of the unique recipes and other weird bits and bobs on Siptah, just the big ones for this video, which we'll get into now. The tower at the center of the map is similar to the library in the Unnamed City on Exiled Lands. You just bring Fragments of Power and interact with any of the pedestals inside to get recipes. It doesn't matter which pedestal in the tower you interact with, they all give the same stuff. The recipes you can get from both libraries will be on the screen now, with the important ones set aside. Neither library will give duplicate recipes, so once you obtain them all, you're set. When I say vault chests, I'm referring specifically to the big chests after the boss of every vault, of which there is only 1 per vault. The other chests in these dungeons have phenomenal loot, but they will not contain recipes. I'll put a list of all the possible recipes you can obtain from these chests on the screen, with the important ones set aside. Keep in mind, the final chest is not guaranteed to have a recipe. The recipes you do get are completely random, and you can get duplicates. Schematics fragments can be dropped by most storm creatures and can be found around Siptah, but the best source for them is at the pools of the Grey Ones. Almost everything summoned here will drop them. Once you obtain 5 of them in your inventory, they automatically convert into one of 201 different recipes, listed on the screen now with the important ones highlighted. Almost every recipe in the game can be obtained this way, but as you can imagine, getting the one you want is a nightmare. This method, like the vaults, can give you duplicate recipes, and the wiki says it's around an average of nearly 1200 turn-ins to unlock everything. If there's something here you're counting on, I'd highly recommend finding an alternative. Surges are a complicated subject, so we're just going to keep it simple and just talk about the recipes. As of the recent loot table changes, the only surge enemies that drop recipes are the 1 and 3 skull bosses from level 4 surges. Veterans and bosses from lower tier surges don't have any recipes in their loot tables anymore. And don't worry if you don't know what a tier 4 surge is, we cover it in the next section. That said, all of the tier 4 surge veterans and bosses pull from the same recipe pool now, listed on the screen here. So you don't have to summon a specific surge to get the recipes you need anymore. I don't know how much of that is intentional though, since even Yagites will teach you frostsmithing and the religion of Ymir. which is kinda weird, not just because they're Darfari, but also because there's no Frostforge on Siptah. But I've tested it in-game and confirmed it with a dev kit. That's just how it goes. It's a smaller pool of recipes, but much easier to get the ones you want. I'm going to refer to the question mark resource as Essence to make things simple. Surges as a mechanic would probably require their own video, but here's a crash course. First, you need to unlock the recipes for focus altars. Just enter any ley shrine and climb the stairs. There's a pedestal you can interact with that will unlock it. Once you have the recipes, head to any of these 3 ley shrines and interact with the focus altar base upstairs and build a focus altar. The type of altar will determine what the surge will summon, and it's loosely based on the regions of the Exiled Lands map. Southern altar will summon Darfari, for example. But once it's built, placing essence into the focus altar converts it into swirling chaos, at which point it can no longer be removed. As the swirling chaos fills, it will fill up the ring around the altar and determine the surge's level at this rate. Going higher than 1000 has a chance to summon a Calamity Surge, with the chance scaling with how overcharged it is, but the one that you want for recipes is exactly 1000 on the dot. The Maelstrom isn't a bad place to start, since it spawns creatures that can be harvested for essence, but it's really hit or miss. Most of the enemies it spawns only drop the 2 lower essences, so affording a full surge will take you a while, though the Sigil of the Gremlin helps a lot. Technically, the Storm can spawn 3-skull bosses, but getting it to do so reliably is difficult. Instead, head to the Fractured Citadel and the Isle of Dusk. In the center is a tower where a Blood Moon Beast and a Red Loiger have guaranteed spawns. The Blood Moon Beast in particular is super useful, since not only can it be harvested with the Sigil of the Gremlin for a whopping 3 shining essences, it has a chance to drop an additional essence in its inventory. These 2 bosses alone can give you 450 to 550 swirling chaos per run, making tier 4 surges relatively cheap. And just be warned, the Blood Moon Beast is one of the few genuinely dangerous bosses in the game. I wouldn't bring a thrall that you're scared to lose. And finally, while not the best source by any means, you can find essence in loot chests up to and including shining essence. So farm the Citadel and keep your eyes peeled elsewhere. It adds up over time. Sorcery first has to be unlocked by interacting with a recipe book in one of these 2 caves, depending on your map. You'll receive an Arcane Staff, a Tome of Kurak, and the ability to construct a Thaumaturgy bench. The Arcane Staff is what you use to actually cast the spells, and you'll need to craft Regent pouches at an alchemy table for whatever you're casting. But unlocking those spells means upgrading your Tome of Kurak and the Thaumaturgy bench. We'll go over where to get every resource you need for that later, but I'll have what you need on the screen for reference. I stole it from the wiki. Sorcery has a lot of useful spells, but 4 in particular are extremely important unlocks for farming. Mass Cull, Detect Resources, Summon Corpse, and the Transfertory Stone. Mass Cull harvests at around a steel tool's harvesting power in a large area around you, and in Chapter 4 it will be the only viable way to farm certain resources. It requires you to be 20% corrupted, and it costs 1 cloth pouch to cast. Detect Resources will highlight all resources nearby, and we went over this earlier, but it also gives you the perk Careful Harvest as a side effect. It costs nothing to cast, and you can turn it on and off at will, so if the visual effect looks annoying, you can just enable it when you need it. Summon Corpse allows you to summon your last body to a circle of power for the price of 50 Brimstone, a glass flask, and 1 Sacrificial Blood, which is a resource we go over later. The corpse will have its entire inventory intact, so not only will this allow you to save your loot if you die while you're out, it also allows you to transport an entire body's worth of materials in an instant. And finally, the Transfertory Stone. It's a teleporter. Build any number of them, walk inside, and choose your destination to teleport as far as you like. These teleporters have to be ignited first and will consume sacrificial blood to do so, but once lit, you can use it as many times as you like. 2 caveats though. Firstly, when you teleport with these, you gain corruption that scales with the distance you traveled, and an effect called Tainted, which prevents a portion of your corruption from being cleansed until it wears off. Keep dancers or cleansing brews around and give yourself time to shake off the corruption when teleporting, or you'll be extremely vulnerable. Secondly, other players can use your teleporters, so be careful where you put them. Leaving a teleporter in your base is an easy way to lose everything you own. And while this isn't technically a sorcery, I'll include the map room in this section for our super new viewers. To unlock it, travel to the unnamed city and head inside the building next to the obelisk and speak to the archivist. He'll give you the cartographer knowledge. You can do this at level 1, and there's no prerequisites. This knowledge allows you to craft what's called a map room, but it isn't really a room at all, it's just a teleportation device. It lets you warp to any of the obelisks you find in the game world, of which there are 10. You have to interact with an obelisk before you can teleport to it, but once you do, you can teleport as many times as you like. Just know this is a one-way teleport though, so you're going to have to find your own way home afterwards. In the early game, before you've got all your sorceries, obelisks are the best way to get around. Sadly, there's no equivalent on Siptah though. We're finally into the resource section of this resource guide, and we're going to be starting with everything you need for your sorcery unlocks, starting with sorcerer spell pages. These can be found in the game as interactable items, typically located next to sorcerers themselves or next to areas related to sorcery. This isn't a super efficient source of pages though, since they're not guaranteed to be there and they take a while to respawn. But you'll need to find at least one to start before you can craft your own. Virtually every camp with a transmutory stone or other sorcery equipment will have a scroll nearby. Additionally, sorcerers themselves have a chance to drop spell pages and failed spell pages when killed. Failed pages can be combined into normal pages at a ratio of 10:1 in the Thaumaturgy bench. To craft spell pages from scratch or combined failed spell pages, you'll need a Sorcerer Thrall. It doesn't matter what tier it is, the only difference is the speed. I typically grab a tier 1 since they break faster. Each research attempt will cost either Sacrificial Blood or failed spell pages. Not to be confused with generic blood, demon blood, or religious bloods, Sacrificial Blood for sorcery specifically is obtained by knocking a thrall unconscious and dragging them to a sacrificial stone. You won't have the recipe for a sacrificial stone until you've upgraded your Tome of Kurak at least once, so find one of the sorcerer spell pages in the wild first. Soul essences gather through the same process, you just need the flask to be in the sacrificial stone beforehand. You'll notice the animation for this is extremely long. Thankfully, you can cancel the animation. Place as many of these stones next to each other as you like. Once you've begun the sacrifice, turn to the next stone in the line and interact with it. Move towards it when the animation stops, then interact with it again to start a new sacrifice, continuing this down the line. Even though the animation was cancelled, each sacrifice will continue to completion, saving you an immense amount of time. Don't waste your time crafting these. Head to Suppermaru in the Exiled Lands or the Camp of the Castaways in Siptah and talk to Vendor Skinflint. For a silver coin, he'll give you 10 glass flasks. And at that rate, even a moderate amount of silver will convert into vaults full of flasks. If the Camp of the Castaways is too far away, you can smelt crystals in a furnace to make glass and then convert it into flasks in a casting table, but this is a lot slower. Silver is found primarily in two locations, the Abandoned Silver Mine and the Descent of Dagon, with the Silver Mine having far better quantities inside the dungeon and around the outside of it. Siptah has silver scattered really all over the map, with some larger concentrations around certain vaults. The volcano has a collection of 4 goldstone rock noses. Kill them and harvest them with a pick to get lots of gold. If you need more, mine obsidian. With efficient harvest and detect resources, the amount of gold that you get is way higher than it used to be. Alternatively, turning in blood crystals to the merchants outside of the Kurak dungeon grants Magi's caches that give you gold, silver, demon blood, steelfire, sorcerer spell pages, alchemical base, and more, albeit in small quantities. I don't recommend intentionally farming blood crystal for its own sake, but bloodstone rock noses and golems are all over the place, so it really doesn't cost you any time to kill them when you see them. Siptah has it much easier since gold can be mined directly outside many of the vaults and in huge quantities. The rocks look almost identical to silver, but they're always worth hitting. Check outside vaults, inside the city of Zakatl, and in the Isle of Dusk, which has both a large cluster of goldstone itself in the center and obsidian dotted throughout. Spiders, locusts, komodos, scorpions, salamanders, and slugs will all give Ichor when harvested with a pick. Spiders also give Gossamer when harvested with a sickle, and since we're going over spider spawn locations, I'll include Gossamer in this section to save some time. Gossamer can also be harvested by using a sickle on the little web sacks on the floor near most spider spawn locations. Vault bosses can be harvested for abysmal flesh, which gives 1 Ichor when cooked, and the generic enemies in these vaults can be harvested for devolved body parts, which convert into Ichor when placed into a fluid press, meaning that your average vault run will give you a decent amount of Ichor every time. The spider vaults in particular let you double up on these resources, since they can be harvested for Gossamer or Ichor, while also giving the organs that give yet more Ichor. With the new gold sources, crafting Alchemical Base is now viable on both maps, but farming Alchemical Base directly is still a good idea. To do this, kill tier 3 bearers and open the supply materials they drop. If you have the right kind, there's a good chance they'll give you huge quantities of Alchemical Base. Much like the Bloodstone Rocknoses, just keep the spawn points of bearer thralls you find in the back of your mind, so that if you're out farming or adventuring you can stop by and maybe get some Alchemical Base out of it. If you just want to grind bears, the best places to do this are at the Den or the Black Galleon in the Exiled Lands, as they're relatively safe to clear and have 3 bearers each that you can cycle through while thralling. Siptah doesn't have anything quite like that, but there are bearers scattered around in the smaller camps and nearly every capital has one as well. Farming the components for Alchemical Base is a lot easier on Siptah though, so bearers should be a secondary choice. Black blood is harvested from killing the 3-skulled Children of Jill. These are found in the caves of the northeast in the Exiled Lands and the Frozen North. In the Exiled Lands, the smaller ones will not give any black blood, it's just the bosses. Siptah has the same kind of boss that we mentioned earlier on top of New Luxor, or you can farm the harpies in the Volary of the Harpy or the Volary of Jill. The smaller birds in these vaults will give black blood when harvested, unlike their exiled counterparts. If you've got extra Sorcerer spell pages, failed or otherwise, you can also dismantle them to get some black blood on either map. Additionally, many Maelstrom creatures have a chance to drop a blood sac, which, when opened, has a chance to give you any kind of blood, including black blood. If you're far from the Volaries in the north, go to the pools of the Grey Ones and summon creatures. Nearly all of them are guaranteed to drop a blood sac when killed this way. The best and easiest source of blood is to place human flesh into a fluid press. People are everywhere on both maps, and if you're in a pinch, you can even pull your bracelet and harvest your own body for some emergency blood. Dragonhorns are harvested from dragons, and are limited to 1 per kill for everything except bosses. So you'll need to kill either the Red Mother or the 3-skulled green dragon if you want them in bulk. Loigers in the Isle of Siptah also give more than 1. These can be found in the Maelstrom, at the Citadel on the Isle of Dusk, and can be summoned at the pools of the Grey Ones. This is a resource that you should be crafting by farming its constituent parts and combining them in a Firebowl Cauldron. Almost no other method of obtaining Dragonpowder will come close to crafting it yourself in terms of efficiency. The exception being the Sellsword, if you're on Siptah. To unlock him, you first have to free him from a purge and then enlist him as a contact in your tavern. For 10,000 gold coins, he'll sell you 10 bombs, and at the right spots, you can get thousands of Goldstone in a matter of minutes. That's 40 to 100 bombs per run, depending on where you farm. Only downside being that they will be explosive jars when you purchase them, not Dragonpowder. If you're on Siptah, this is an extremely viable and efficient way to farm bombs if you got access to Goldstone. You can technically do this on the Exiled Lands, it's just a lot less efficient. I'd recommend farming the individual components instead. Crafting tens of thousands of gold coins seems like a hassle, but here's how you can save yourself some time. Place down a clan coffer and place your gold bars inside, then speak to the NPC and click Exchange Treasure. He'll instantly convert all of your gold bars into gold coins, so you don't have to sit in front of a casting bench waiting for hours. Sadly, it won't work for silver as he converts everything into the equivalent of gold, so you'll still have to make your own silver coins the old-fashioned way. High efficiency farming of tar means prioritizing locations with lots of densely packed creatures and making sure to stretch any hides that stretch into thick hides. For example, if you place 2 rhino hides into a tannery, you'll get 2 thick leather and 2 tar back. However, if you stretch those hides in a tanner's table first, they convert into 3 thick hides, giving 3 thick leather and 3 tar instead. Rhinoceros hides, elephant hides, and bear pelts should all be stretched prior to tanning. Everything else you can just tan them as they are. The Savannah in the Exiled Lands has rhinos, elephants, and felines, while the northern areas have mammoths for elephant hides, bears, and saber-tooths. But the absolute best location is the Midnight Grove. Here you have a huge quantity of creatures neatly lined up for easy farming, along with one of the largest bear populations in the game. Around the center of the map in Siptah, you'll find rhinos to the east and west, buffalo to the south, and elephants in the north. And further south, the Isle of Dawn is basically one large savanna biome with elephants, rhinos, and so on. Just farm whatever's closest. Shattered Springs is right next to an obelisk and has an immense amount of brimstone, making it the most convenient spot in the game. You'll have to wear a gas mask or run Corrupted Vitality though, since the area is toxic. The dungeon revamp added a surprisingly high amount of brimstone into the Well of Skelos. The only downside is the travel time to get to it and the extreme temperatures. Shattered Springs will wind up being more efficient as a result, but this is another amazing spot for brimstone. Additionally, there are 3 caves that contain brimstone in decent quantities: Sinner's Refuge, Galaman's Tomb, and the Executioner's Entrance. Keep in mind, the little brimstone rocks that you can pick up by hand will no longer be mineable after April 2nd, so all of the scattered rocks in the volcano and all of the underwater brimstone in the jungle are more or less worthless for farming in bulk, though you can at least still use mass cull in the volcano. Siptah, by contrast, has brimstone scattered all over the place. The center of the map is the absolute best spot, but it's nowhere near as good as the Shattered Springs is for Exiled Lands, so don't feel obligated to trek all the way there. I'll try to highlight all the sources of brimstone and have them on the screen for you now, but like everything else in Siptah, you can find it scattered around the vaults or in weird locations in the southern islands. The Isle of Dawn even has large nodes underwater, if you don't mind swimming. Crystals cannot be mined with a tool after April 2nd. This means that a lot of old spots aren't worth farming at all anymore, as the nodes aren't close enough to be efficiently mass culled. Locations like the Passage or either of the Gremlin vaults aren't really worth your time once that change drops. So we're just going to focus on the good spots for this video. For the Exiled Lands, the remaining viable locations are the Warren of Degenerates, the Cavern of Fiends, Hanuman's Grotto, and Scudler's Shortcut under the Aqueduct. That last one is by far the best location, and even after the change, a single mass cull will still net you plenty of crystals. Siptah was hit hard by the change, as now the only good places to get crystal are around the ley shrines in small quantities and at the center of the map. Thankfully, mass cull still works for these, but it's not nearly as good as the Exiled Lands. Additionally, Tier 3 bearers have a small chance to have crystals in their supply crates. If you're not already killing these for their alchemical base, you might want to include them. Demon blood is best harvested from bosses in corrupted areas using a pick. And these days there are options for just about every portion of the map. Your production of demon blood will outpace your other materials, so you don't generally have to worry about finding the best spot, just a convenient spot that you can farm alongside other materials. My favorite boss to farm is still the Black Yeti though. He's extremely easy to kill and yields huge amounts of demon blood. Even better, since the dungeon revamp, you can find one in the Temple of Frost, which is just outside an obelisk for easy access. While not always the most reliable way to get demon blood, I should mention that many creatures in the Exiled Lands have a chance to spawn as a corrupted variant. Areas where the NPCs are prone to fighting each other will often generate corrupted mobs on their own and can make for a quick and easy source of demon blood. In Siptah, much of the same advice applies, as many bosses give demon blood when harvested, especially including every vault boss. Again, I'll recommend the Demon Spider vaults, since you can get Ichor, demon blood, Gossamer, and more out of a single trip from every creature inside. All Maelstrom creatures will drop demon blood in their inventories, and some even drop blood sacks that can give more, but my favorite farm is Corrupted Ogres. You can find them in the Northeast Redwoods and scattered around the Isle of Dusk. They're easy to kill and give as much demon blood as any boss. Feathers are harvested from birds, harpies, and birds' nests, with the best source being from the birds themselves. In the desert, you have ostriches in the center and just below the unnamed city, and in the jungle you have tropical birds just about everywhere. In the north, you'll also have the harpies. You can pick whatever's closest, but the desert and jungle variants are relatively close to obelisks. Head to the Volary of Jill or the Volary of Harpy on Siptah in the northwest. Birds also spawn along the beaches of the main island near every default player spawn point. If you're in the south, the wetland portion between the Isles of Dusk and Dawn also have tropical birds wandering about. All of the bosses in the unnamed city will drop Fragments of Power when killed. There are also small chests scattered around the city that, when interacted with, will give you another Fragment of Power. Because of this, it's the best place to farm them in the Exiled Lands. Siptah has a lot more options compared to the Exiled Lands, since almost every 3-skull boss on the map has a chance to drop fragments, but some places are better than others. New Luxor and the Ruins of Zacatl both have multiple 3-skull bosses in close proximity to each other. They're like miniature versions of the Unnamed City, but minus the chests. Shag-Eye Warriors, which look like little blue and green mosquito-like creatures, have a relatively high chance of dropping them as well. You can find them at the center of the map by the Accursed Citadel, and they also spawn during the storm. If you're in the south, the best place to farm is by summoning creatures at the pools of the Grey Ones. Even the easy-to-kill ones such as Thunhas will still give you fragments every time, and creatures that don't normally drop Fragments of Power will do so if summoned at the pools. We've mentioned the pools of the Grey Ones a few times, so we should probably clear up what that actually is and how to use it. This is another one of those gigantic topics, but here's a crash course. The pools are a set of 3 summoning pools in the Isle of Dawn. To interact with it, place a figurine inside the pedestal. It will consume the figurine and summon whatever the figurine represented, allowing you to fight it for loot. If you're after essence, bosses are best, while the smaller packs of creatures are better for everything else. The process is simple enough, but getting the figurines you want is about as random as everything else is in Siptah. The best I can say is that virtually every point of interest, that is to say, every location with a name that you can discover in the southern portion of the map, has a chance to have figurines spawn somewhere inside of them. I know that's not super helpful, but that's because they don't always spawn in the same locations, and what figurines you'll find can vary. It's something that you're just gonna have to keep an eye out for as you adventure. That said, Grey One camps almost always have at least one figurine, same with the camps of the first ones, although the human NPC camps can have them on occasion as well. Look inside huts, next to walls, and inside the corners of structures. Once you're used to picking them out, they'll be a lot easier to find. Glowing goop can be found inside the Dregs dungeon at the bottom of these water pits, scattered around the northern jungle, and inside one underwater cave in the southern jungle. Goop can be found on the perimeters of the main island of Siptah in the water. Alternatively, head to the Harbor of the Drowned or the Harbor of the Twice Drowned. Glowing goop is all over the interiors of these dungeons. Grey lotus flowers are the only flowers that don't naturally grow anywhere on the map. The only way to obtain this is inside loot chests or from monster drops. The easiest places are at the Sinkhole in the Exiled Lands or at the Tower of Siptah, but there's a chance to find them in almost any dungeon loot chests, and these aren't nearly as rare as they used to be. When you do find Grey Lotus, it has a chance to be either Grey Lotus seeds or the flower itself, and you're probably going to want to farm more for potions, so I'll explain farming in the next section. Beyond farming or looting though, skeletons and undead firstmen have a reasonable chance of dropping Grey Lotus and other lotus flowers in moderate amounts. If you're lucky, you can get enough to last you for a while off of just a few skeleton kills. This applies to low-level skeletons as well, so farm early and farm often. Let me say first that I would not recommend using planters for anything other than Grey Lotus, and maybe Frost Lotus if you're on Siptah and far from it. You'll need potent compost to grow any lotus plant, which itself requires basic compost. You make this in a compost heap by either combining putrid meat, bone meal, and plant fiber, or by combining dung and plant fiber. The compost then needs to be upgraded by combining it with blood and raw ash, once again in a compost heap. We already went over blood, so we'll go over raw ash in the next section in case somebody needs to jump to it. Once you've got your potent compost, just place it into a planter with seeds and give it time. To get more seeds, place the flowers into a dryer with some bark. It's a pain, but it is technically renewable. Keep your eye out for potent compost in the early game, because you can get large amounts of it from loot chests to get you started. Raw ash is very easy to get. It's a byproduct of mining obsidian just like gold. Head to either the volcano in the Exiled Lands or the Isle of Dusk in Siptah to find it in bulk. Volatile glands are best harvested from red salamanders. Naturally, the red mother is the best singular source as she has the highest chance to yield many glands at a time, but because it's a lot easier to find lizards in large quantities, it's often the better choice if you're not looking for demon blood or horns. Largely redundant with the addition of phyroxic weapons, Sandbeast bile glands are used for venom weapons and can still be nice to have. You can find Sandbeast at the Sandswept Ruins or at the Isle of Dusk. We kind of covered this in the intro, but this is an important resource, so once again, unlock the Zath religion and bring a Zath ritual knife to use on spiders. This gives you Zath bags. When opened, these have a relatively high chance to give large quantities of skulls, making it the best source in the game. Make sure to hit the spider once with another tool first, so you can get double the amount of Zath bags with efficient harvest. This can be crafted by combining glowing essence and brimstone. You'll have to visit the dregs and unlock glowing essence by clicking the tablet just inside. The recipe is unobtainable on Siptah though. Instead, kill whites and harvest them with any tool. I use a skinny knife so I don't fill my inventory with putrid meat. Although I'll say I harvest whites even on exiled lands since it tends to be a bit more convenient. Whites are best found outside the dead mounds in the exiled lands since that's just outside of an obelisk. They can also be found inside the Wine Cellar dungeon and the Warmaker Sanctuary. The center of the map has the most whites in Siptah, followed by the ruins of Zacatl. Again, these aren't the only places, just the best places to find them in bulk. We're moving into the bulk resources now, and what you're looking for with these is high volume and tight node placement, ideally with as much overlap as possible. God's Claw Passage is the best location on either map, followed by the Silver Mine, though there are plenty of locations in the north, jungle, and desert. Really, there isn't a biome in the game on either map that doesn't have at least some iron, so keep a few in mind. Siptah follows the usual formula. Great patches of it are scattered around the vaults, the Den of the Wolfman in particular, with the best location being in the center of the map. Iron can be found scattered around the jutting stones by the center, as well as plenty in the claws in the west. But generally speaking, the iron patches in Siptah are much better on average, so you'll find good spots just about everywhere on the map. Just like with iron, you're looking for dense node placement and high volume. The landslide inside the Silver Mine is the best spot in the game and will net you tens of thousands of stone in less than a minute, with excellent patches of stone just outside to the north as well. The Volcano and Noob River also have great streaks of dense rock placement. While the central and southern desert is more of the same. The same areas in the north that have large amounts of iron also have great stone deposits, but if you're looking to farm up a castle, I'd set up a teleporter outside the Silver Mine and clear it off cooldown. Unfortunately, Siptah has no rock slide equivalent, so you're mostly going to be walking around cliffs and mining the sporadic rock clusters there. Underneath the jutting rock structures around the center of the map, you'll find more great nodes, and wherever there's iron, you'll find decent amounts of stone as well. This is a simple resource with no real tricks, so I'll be quick. You should only ever farm wood with a pickaxe. Even if you got black blood or obsidian, it's better to use a star metal pickaxe for the bark and resin alone. If you're cutting down large quantities of trees, you actually get a really decent amount of bark and resin to start your insulated wood farm. Focus on areas like Noob River, or especially around the areas of the dead mounds that have tons of trees packed closely together. To produce resin otherwise, place wood into a dryer along with some bark at a ratio of 1 wood to 2 bark and let it run. It will produce 1 resin and 2 dry wood, which you can use to make insulated wood. Of course, cutting down trees isn't going to give you enough bark on its own. You'll have to harvest dead trees with a pick if you want it in bulk. The Unnamed City, just outside the dregs, and around the dead mounds all have tons of dead trees and are right next to obelisks, making them the most convenient places to farm in bulk. Though you'll find dead trees scattered all over the place in the desert and on the northern edge of Noob River leading into the desert. The Wine Cellar also has plenty of dead trees, so bring a pick if you're down there for anything else. Siptah has a few patches of dead trees in the sandy portions around the center of the map, but the best place is, as for most resources, the center itself, with huge forests of dead trees all around the perimeter of the tower. The area around the pools of the Grey Ones are also covered with dead trees, so if you're in the area farming the pools, stock up on bark. On either map, excess wood can be turned into bark at a carpenter's bench. It won't be a lot, but if you're deforesting large portions of the map for resin, the extra bark adds up. Scorpion Queen poison can only be crafted with the glands of the Scorpion Queen, shown here. And not every 3-skulled scorpion is a Scorpion Queen, but it's easy to tell the difference as the queens are much larger. For Reaper poison, you'll have to harvest locusts, which are found in the deserts and the jungle in the Exiled Lands, or south of the tower and in the wetlands in Siptah. When harvesting poison glands, it doesn't actually matter what kind of tool you use, so you should use a pick so that you can also harvest Ichor at the same time while you're at it. Many of the vault bosses in Siptah will drop venom sacs as loot as well, which gives a variety of poisons including Scorpion Queen poison when opened. The best source for these is to unlock the Religion of Set and harvest human hearts to turn into antidotes at an altar of Set. The Stygians are meals on wheels for this. You can summon a level 1 purge and have tons of easy to kill humans delivered to your base, giving you plenty of antidotes in no time. If you must have a horse, here's where to find them. There are 3 locations of the Exile Lands that are reliable. South of the dam, west of the crevice, and on the southern island in Noob River. There is a 4th location, but it's not very reliable. Siptah has them scattered all around the plains surrounding the tower, and they're very easy to find in bulk. For oil, get your hands on a tier 3 or named Alchemist. These have a special recipe that allows you to craft 5 oil at the cost of 1 ichor and 1 bark. There's no better way to get it in bulk. Don't waste your time with fish traps. Before April 2nd, you can mine Puffball Mushrooms with a pick. After April 2nd, you'll have to use a Sigil, but you can still harvest them that way. Puffballs can be found all along Noob River and in certain places in the jungle, so go with what's convenient. The puffballs outside the boat that leads into the Dagon dungeon are the closest ones to an obelisk. For Siptah, puffballs are only found in 2 locations, in the center of the far southwest island and on a small strip of land just to the east of that. The Aloe Scar at J7 is the best place in the Exiled Lands with the highest amount of aloe. It's the only place I'd recommend farming. If for some reason you can't safely farm there, you do have smaller patches at the Oasis of Niket above Supermaru, and some outside of Muriela's Hope south of the Den. Aloe plants also dot the entirety of Noob River leading into the jungle, so grab some if you're in the area. Siptah isn't nearly as restrictive, since you can find aloe all along every fresh water source. So every river, pond, and even the shallow waterbeds in the south, there isn't a single portion of the map that doesn't have aloe within reach in large quantities. The Temple of Frost is the only place you should be farming black ice. In the quantities you'll be needing it, it's the only place that makes sense. Bring warm clothes and spicy food to resist the cold. For Siptah, surprise surprise, it's around the vaults and the best spot is at the center of the map. Nothing too shocking. For steel, get a tier 3 or a named blacksmith. These will come with a reinforcement recipe, which allows you to convert an iron reinforcement into a steel reinforcement at the cost of 1 steel fire, which can then be converted into steel bars if you need those instead. The steel fire cost doesn't change with this recipe, but it takes 80% less iron than the old-fashioned way and takes significantly less time overall. And while it isn't a great source, named bearers have a chance to give large quantities of steel in their supply crates, so if you're out hunting tier 3s and you happen to find some named ones, feel free to kill them for a consolation prize. Head over to the Priest King's retreat and kill the boss inside. Harvest it with a pick, and he'll drop infused wraps along with some demon blood. Siptah has an identical boss in the northern portion of the ruins of Sakatl. You should be farming this one for fragments anyways, so don't forget to harvest him with a pick afterwards. Buffs aren't directly related to farming, but I had a buff section in my old farm guide, so I'd feel weird if I left it out. Thankfully, in the current version of the game, buffs are much simpler since you're only buffing your main combat stat. For strength, you'll want a Black Lotus potion and either salted pork or an exotic feast. Black Lotus potions will poison you, so go back to the section on Antidotes if you're not sure how to deal with that. For agility, you'll want an Elixir of Grace and some salted exquisite meat. Black Lotus is found in the Black Gardens, right inside the city of Zelha in the southern jungle. Crimson Lotus is found at the Dead Mounds. Look specifically around the graves and in the water at the center. Black Lotus is found in 2 spots inside the city of Sakatl, as well as outside the harbor of the Twice Drowned and in the far northeast island. While Crimson Lotus is found outside 5 different vaults. And just another reminder, skeletons of all kinds have a decent chance to drop all Lotus plants. Siptah's a huge map, so don't be afraid to kill a skeleton and save yourself the trip. For your strength foods, salted pork is the easiest to farm in bulk since you just have to kill pigs, but it requires Specialist Cooking 1 to unlock, which is found inside the summoning place here. Exotic feasts have a more annoying ingredient list, but you get the recipe automatically after unlocking the stove, which is extremely important on Siptah. Exotic flesh will come from any large animal, eggs can be harvested from birds, and go back to the section on feathers for good locations on that, and dried berries are just berries that have been dried in a dryer. For the salted meats, you're going to need salt, and this is a byproduct of mining brimstone, but you can also grind crystals or stones in a grinder to produce it. For agility, salted exquisite meat is the default, which requires Specialist Cooking 4, found here in the Dead Mounds. Exquisite meat is a rare resource that you obtain from most animals in small amounts, deer, kudos, and baby animals in particular. Make sure you've got your detect resources on. But this is where things get tricky though, since unlocking a good agility food on Siptah means referencing all those recipe sources we mentioned earlier. Specialist Cooking 4 can be obtained from the Surges or Fragment Turn-ins. Specialist Brewing 3 will give you Desert and Jungle Grog as an alternative, but this is only obtained from Schematics. You can even go real old school and unlock the upgraded fish traps. These require a scale of Dagon to craft, which you can get from harvesting any fish person, and the traps have to be baited, so you have to put grubs or insects inside. Over time though, they'll produce unique fish that can buff your stats when eaten. Cooked Grouper will buff your agility damage, and cooked Catfish will buff your strength. Only the Deep Sea Fisher perk is a random vault recipe or a schematics reward. So if you want decent agility foods, you're going to be grinding vaults, surges, schematics, or all of the above. All I can say is, good luck. In my last farming video, I dedicated a section to efficiency tips, and for some reason this section caused a lot of confusion, with some people even claiming things like farm shacks reduced their efficiency. I feel like this is Conan's version of instructions not clear, got dick stuck in ceiling fan, but I'm going to chalk this up to bad explanations, so let's try to make this easier. Mastering efficiency boils down to two very simple principles. Firstly, minimizing travel time, and secondly, building smart farm routes. And when I refer to travel time, I'm specifically referring to the dead time between point A and point B where nothing is being done except traveling. For example, let's say you're heading to the silver mine to do some farming. If you're using map rooms, you'll teleport to either the Shattered Springs or the Unnamed City, jog over there, clear the important parts, and return home if you're not depoting somewhere. If it only takes you, say, 7 or 8 minutes to clear the silver mine, but several minutes to run there and potentially even longer to get home, you could be spending a third or more of your time just traveling. Sure, it's only a few minutes of wasted time, but a few minutes on every farming trip adds up. And if you can manage to save a half hour or more in a day, it makes a world of difference. To prove my point, I played a little bit of Conan just recently, and by the end of my first day on the server, I leveled from 1 to 60, unlocked every single sorcery, activated all of my obelisks, and had enough materials cooking overnight that when I logged in the next day, I could build a large fortified base and had a couple hundred Dragonpowder in the tank. And that's not to mention all the miscellaneous resources and gear I had. I'm not saying this to suck my own cock, because really anybody can do this with practice. Talking about the farming, not the cock-sucking part. Just to demonstrate how quickly you can progress if you're playing efficiently. And before anybody gets excited for that playthrough, it's one of the many that I had to drop. I had to drop it a couple days into the playthrough due to scheduling errors, so it didn't wind up going anywhere. But to get back on track, reducing that travel time means either farm shacks, transitory stones, the summoned corpse spell, or all of the above. The farm shack is your low-tech option. Basically, you're abusing the fact that you can spawn at multiple locations when you die to teleport across the map. Building a small outpost near a convenient farm spot means that you can, at any time, pull your bracelet off, teleport to that spot, farm it, and then pull your bracelet again to get home. Essentially, you're completely removing the travel time required to get to your point of farm and back. I used the example of the silver mine earlier because it's one of the most popular spots in the game to do this, since it's extremely fast to clear and has tons of resources. And now with the addition of sorceries, you don't even have to use a bedroll or even worry about how to transport the loot home anymore. Transportory stones will go both ways. And if you're not quite there yet, you can just warp your loot home with the Summon Corpse spell. Even if you just use the farm shack and depot your stuff in it until you have enough for a full inventory and then run it home, you're still shaving several trips out of your farming time since you don't always have to go back and forth. And the farm shack itself can be as simple or as extra as you want it. I made the mistake of saying a farm shack is just a bed and some storage in the last video, which made some viewers believe you weren't allowed to put benches in it. You guys, you know you don't actually need my permission to do things, right? What am I, your mom? But to be clear, a bed and some storage is just the bare minimum you need to make it work. If you want to build a full factory, go ahead. If you want something more discreet, I showed how you can fit every bench you need into a 2x2 in another video of mine, and you can use those techniques to make all kinds of tiny specialized farm bases like this one. I'll make more guides on how to make tiny bases later, but it's entirely up to you how much or how little you want to pack into these. Saving time with spawn points and sorcery is nice, but the real magic happens when you start planning your farm routes. For our example, we're going to be making a Dragonpowder farm route, since that's always popular, and I'll be making the bold choice of using the exact same one from the last video since it, like the farm shack, spawned some controversy. I'll try to explain it better this time. And just to be abundantly clear, I don't even recommend that you use this bomb route for reasons that we'll discuss afterwards. I'm just using it to illustrate the point. We're farming Dragonpowder, so ideally our route would cover tar, brimstone, crystal, and demon blood if possible. Let's start with brimstone. Because it's next to an obelisk, we can teleport to the Shattered Springs from anywhere with a map room, making it a great starting point. Don't forget to kill and harvest the rock noses inside for crystal and brimstone while you're here. After that, we already know that there's plenty of dead trees right outside the dregs, and there's a lot of hyenas as well. Better still, if we go just a little further down the river, there's a crystal cave, so we'll use a map room to teleport down here and kill 3 birds with 1 stone. Remember to bring sorcery equipment, as mass cull will be the only way to farm crystals after April 2nd. With pelts, bark, crystal, and brimstone taken care of, we just need demon blood. You've got a few options for this. Just a little bit inland, there's a cave with a 3-skull spider boss in it. Or you could have gone into the dregs before you did your hides and bark, since there's another 3-skulled spider in there. Or you could even just get your demon blood later. Let's say for simplicity's sake that you killed the spider, so you've completed your farm run and every resource is accounted for. Even with this little farm route, you can start to see what I mean. First, we figured out all of the components we needed. Then we chose areas that had all of those resources as close together as possible. For a few of the resources, we could even farm them at the same time. As a result, every second we spend on this farm route will be spent actually farming resources, as opposed to farming one spot, running home, farming the next spot, and so on and so forth. And the thing is, this route's actually pretty bad. We can improve this a million different ways. We didn't make use of any of the best spots for crystal or hides, and running past multiple highly trafficked obelisks with hundreds of bombs worth of materials in your pockets isn't a great idea on a PvP server, hence why I wouldn't recommend it. So don't get your dick caught in a ceiling fan over the particulars here. Just pay attention to how you're spending your time. It's the one resource you never get back. Someday I might even just sit down and share all of the actual viable farm routes I've come up with, but this video is long enough as it is. So take what you've seen and do your best. And if you enjoyed the video, send me $1 million American dollars in unmarked bills. Or leave a like. And as always, thanks for watching.